Hello and welcome to the Curious Cult podcast, the show where we talk to incredible people about their fascinating curiosity. I am your obsessively curious host, Nick Haralambous, and in this episode, I talk with my good friend Rand Fishkin about his curiosity. In 2004, Rand co-founded the SEO software company Moz, where he served as CEO until 2014. In 2018, he founded Sparktoro, making software to put audience intelligence at every marketer's fingertips. He is the author of the incredible book Lost and Founder, a painfully honest field guide to the startup world, and he is a frequent keynote speaker on marketing and entrepreneurship topics around the world. In his spare time, he likes to travel, eat pasta, and hang out with his wife, renowned author Geraldine de Ritter, who is one of the guests on our show. Coming soon, I'm very excited to be talking to Rand today. So I'm going to dive right in and ask you the very first question, which I ask all of my guests to get a sense of what they were like when they were children. So were you a very curious child?
Yeah, I think so. I was an obsessive child. I don't know if you ever had that, Nick, but I'm like this as an adult as well, where once I find something I like, I really like it. I want to do it all the time. It's all I want to do. And I was definitely like that as a kid too.
And then what does that tire ever? Like you drop off from things quite quickly?
I think it's often more of a long tail, slow burn. So, I'll get obsessed. When I was a kid, for example, we had a frog pond behind our house. So my parents lived on the border of, I don't think it was a park. I think it was just the forest, like some woods. And so I'd go, it's crazy to think right now, parents do not let their kids do this, but between the ages of 6 and 16, right? I just, a lot of days, especially in the summer, I'd just leave the house after having breakfast and I'd come back at some point for lunch or dinner, but I'd go hang out in the woods, just wandering around. And a lot of that was just waiting at this frog pond to see if I could spot frogs, and then try and catch them and try and bring some home. And there was probably 3 summers where that's all I was obsessed with.
And when you say you're obsessed with frogs at that time, did you then go and research what frogs were in your pond and dive deeply?
Yeah. Like, mom, I want to go to the library and then check out every book on frogs that you can and learn about poison dart frogs. Mom, I want to go to South America and see this frog. A lot more challenging in the 1980s to learn about whatever you wanted to learn about.
That's great. I mean, that's actually one of the key talking points that I'm getting quite a lot of pushback on at the moment with this narrative of curiosity and ownership, that today people have very little in the way of excuse to not learn the things that they're curious about. Everyone has access to the internet. Everyone has a smart device. YouTube is free, and you can just go on and search and learn about anything and figure out how to play the harmonica or whatever. So what do you say to that?
I agree with it. And also, I think that information sent and information accuracy and comprehensiveness have become more challenging because of the diversity of sources and because of the diversity of opinions that people put out there. So when you start researching something on the internet, frogs is a relatively benign one, but coronavirus is not a relatively benign one, right? So if you become obsessed with, hey, I want to learn more about this trend and this thing, it looks like there's this viral infection and technically it seems much less dangerous than the flu, but a lot of countries seem to be worried about it and it's in the press all the time. Why is that happening? And if you start searching, you can go down some rabbit holes that will scare you and mislead you and cause unnecessary fear. And unfortunately, there's a lot of incentive for that. So I think that the availability of information and the diversity of it does create new challenges that we didn't have, when you'd go to the library and research influenza.
I suppose that also plays into the signal versus noise conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, I find it extremely difficult, coupled with choice paralysis, to know what to focus my curious attention onto next. Like, I find myself going very wide and not very deep in my exploration of things that interest me. How do you kind of pick the thing that you want to be curious about next?
I am mostly interested in things that bring me joy and happiness, or things that I think will dramatically improve either sort of my life and existence, or the life and existence of lots of people around me. And I will say that as I get older and as I have more sort of success and comfort, a lot of the focus shifts to, okay, how do I give back, right? How do I make sure that the things that I'm working on and the things that I'm building are a match with how I feel about what's right for the world? And that is, I'm less, I mean that less in a charity way and more in a, how do I direct my life's work, my writing, my speaking, my companies and entrepreneurship, my endorsement of whatever political things and social causes, that kind of stuff.
And can you give me an example of how the curiosity has changed from, let's say, your mid to early 20s to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, I think in my 20s, I applied a lot of that obsession to, I would say, things that were mostly in two directions, really, right? My mid-20s is when I got into SEO, right? And I founded this company, Moz, and I started that through a blog. That was another really interesting ones where back in the early 2000s, you could not just search for information on how Google worked and how to optimize for search engines, because it didn't exist. And so I created it, right? I tried to be that answer. And for a long time, I think Moz was maybe still is, right, a primary resource for a ton of people trying to learn that practice. And that curiosity sort of led to the creation of that company in a very unintentional, at least initially, unintentional way, right? I started writing about SEO and learning about it and trying all these experiments, occasionally pissing the people at Google off. And that led to folks reaching out and becoming, at first, consulting clients, and then when we shifted to software, becoming customers of the software. And that was a great model, right? That eventually became called content marketing, but when I was doing it, it was just, hey, I'm going to blog about this. And the other things that I did when I was in my early 20s, I would say were much more small scale focused. I had almost no exposure to or interest in bigger trends. That's everything from, I was not particularly worried about climate change. I was not particularly interested in or worried about racism, income inequality, abuse of monopoly power, how economic opportunity is distributed, how entrepreneurship and funding is distributed, how to affect and fix those things. Now I have a lot of interest in that big scale stuff. And I think that's where the shift happened.
Although to me, it does sound like you were solving a problem for other people while you were building Moz. It wasn't like it was a completely selfish and self-serving thing that you were doing.
Just to be clear, right? Like I strongly believe that my interests are personally aligned with these broad trends. I think it's just that as you get older, you see more of that. You see how you're connected to the rest of the world, right? So, my Moz experience is what led me down this path, particularly in thinking about the large scale consequences of how startups are funded and how entrepreneurs are encouraged to act and behave, and what sort of gets press and attention and influence, especially here in the U.S., especially on the West Coast of the United States. That experience for me was very positive and wonderful in a lot of ways, and very negative in sort of the final outcome. I mean, Moz is still going. Technically, Geraldine and I are still shareholders, but that company's like a $50-60 million a year business that is profitable, but it's very slow growing, and so it's sort of stuck in the middle as a venture business and unlikely to have a great outcome, which seems insane, right? That seems wild and crazy. And why is that, right? And it's because of these sort of structural things. And I think that a lot of the mistakes directionally and from a leadership perspective that I made, well, I own them, right? They are my fault, my responsibility, because I was the founder and CEO until 2014, and saved the business for a few years after that. Even those decisions were made because of the pressures and the demands of the capital class that had invested in us, and because of the cultural, startup culture environment that we were in. And so I want to change those, right? I want other entrepreneurs to not make the same mistakes I did. And I also want to open my own eyes and see and create an alternative future for my next company, for Sparktoro.
Cool. That's really interesting. Outside of Geraldine, is there anyone who has sparked deeper curiosity that led you down the path that you're on now?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I think I've been very inspired by a whole bunch of folks. I don't know if you know the team at Wistia, Chris and Brendan. Yeah, Chris Savage. So they raised some money early in their journey, have built an extraordinary business, right? Wistia is this wonderful video hosting service. We're about to become customers of Sparktoro again, because I filmed some videos for, to show off the product and stuff. And they have, built something great, but it is not like Moz. It's not quite venture scale. It's right on the cusp, right? It's in the tens of millions of dollars. It's profitable. It's growing, but at, I think low double digits rate of growth. And so they ended up buying back their investment, their shares from their investors. They basically took out a big loan, bought out the investors that they had who were seeking that, sort of high multiple return, and now they can operate their business the way they want to. And they're not alone. Buffer did something really similar, and turns out, no surprise, right? Joel and Chris, the guys from Buffer and from Wistia, are investors in Sparktoro. Right? They saw the alternative investment model that we built, and they were like, yeah, that's the thing. That's the next thing. That's what we want to do, right? And so that was very inspirational. There have been tons of other people. I've been friends with a guy in Philadelphia, Will Reynolds, who runs Sear Interactive, which is an agency, obviously not a venture scale type of business. He's never raised a dime. Very, very self-sufficient business, but has always had this strong, independent mindset and a streak of questioning why anyone would raise money to build their company. And I think, the way he built Sear, and I've watched that business grow because we've been friends for, a decade and a half now, has just been exceptional to watch. And yeah, to see him sort of turn down offers to buy the company because he's like, what else do I want to do with my life? I love this. I don't need tens of millions more dollars. I need something to do in the morning, something to excite me.
So you've mentioned Sparktoro. It's obviously your new startup business, Zebra company, whatever you'd like to call it at this point. I'm curious about the role of curiosity in the founding of this business. I mean, it seems like you're doing it completely differently and answering a lot of questions that you had when you founded Moz. And so how do you and your co-founder deal with the concept of curiosity every day in your business?
It's really interesting. I think part of us is, so I think of curiosity as a great catalyst for thinking of alternatives to what is traditional, what is standard, what is expected. And we've certainly done that in a number of ways. Curiosity can also, I think, get founders into trouble sometimes when it applies to specific aspects of building your product and your feature set. I'm someone who, when I was in my early days, curiosity would lead me down this path of, oh man, I really want to build a better version of this tool. And I really want to help solve this problem for SEOs. And I really want to help solve this problem. And so I would make a list of features that was way too long, right? Way too in-depth, way too complex, and not focused enough on building a feature set that tied to a core value, right, or a core value proposition. And I think that is what separates a lot of very, very successful businesses from businesses that can go off rails, especially product companies in early stages and middle stages of their growth. And, I'm sure you and I have seen tons of these types of companies, right, where it becomes a feature factory and you're sort of like, yeah, what do they do exactly? And why would I choose them? They're sort of, okay, they do a ton of different stuff. And yeah, maybe some people buy them for this and some people buy them for that. And so with Sparktoro, one of the things that Casey and I have been very careful to do is to say, we are going to be best in the world at solving this one type of problem. And we're not going to get distracted by anything else. So we know we're going to hear certain feature requests from our customers and potential customers. And when they go in the same direction of what we want to build, we are going to laser in on them and build them and do a great job of it. And when they take us off that path, we're just going to say no. And we're going to recognize that we're leaving that money on the table, and that's going to be okay.
It's absolutely a theme that I'm seeing more and more with entrepreneurs who are aging out of their early 20s. They're learning that curating and saying no is much more important than building and saying yes.
Oh my gosh, it really is. I'm not sure what it is about youth that makes you think you can do everything.
It's youth. I think it's there in that word, right? You think you're invincible. And then when you hit 30, you're like, oh, crap, I couldn't build 15 features in that week. And then you figure it out.
Or you built them and then you realize, oh no, what am I? I've built Frankenstein's monster. That's not what anyone wanted.
It's an interesting thing comparing that statement and sentiment in business to personal development. So one of the things that I'm focusing on quite heavily in my new book is the concept of an expert generalist. And the phrase that I've used in the past that I didn't realize was tied to expert generalist is a T-shaped person, a jack of all trades and a master of one. And that kind of flies in the face of our conversation here around focus and being the best in the world at something. I historically have struggled with my role in startups, and the truth is I'm an expert generalist. I am very good at getting from 0 to 1. I can sell, I can design a little bit, I can pitch, I can code, but I'm not the best in the world in any of that. And I think in startups there is a place for that. I would kind of argue that you're probably an expert generalist too, because you can do the accounts of your company, do the marketing, do the branding, do the SEO, build a website. So how do you think that expert generalists fit into a laser-focused startup?
I think that there is some great amount of value in having a lot of raw knowledge across many different practices, right, and many different areas of need in a company, and then being able to synthesize that into a vision. Because the CEO, the founder's job, right, in the early stages is to have a vision for what the company is building and why, and who is the customer and why, and how are we going to solve it that's different from all the other alternatives in the market, and why is that a better option? And how are we going to, price it, and how are we going to package it? All those kinds of things. And you really do need that, expert generalist across many, many platforms, right, across many disciplines, in order to be able to synthesize a great vision. I think if you don't, right, if you're not great at marketing, you're going to, and I don't want to say great, right? You don't have to be a specialist. You don't have to go super deep, but you have to understand how people behave and how marketing channels behave and what earns amplification and doesn't, yada, yada, right? To be able to craft the vision for how is the packaging and distribution of this product going to go out to market, and what's the product going to be, because that influences so much of marketing, and marketing should influence that. Same with development, right? If you don't understand how programming works, databases work, software storage, and you're building a software product, guess what? You're going to design something that when engineers get to work on it, has a lot of challenges, right? And not always that it's not buildable, but that it doesn't scale and work in the ways that you want it to, and that customers want it to. So having that, at least for me, has been hugely helpful. And it's, I don't want to say that it's easy, but oh my God, Nick, compared to building Moz, it is a breeze, just a breeze building it the second time.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, all the statistics kind of suggest exactly what you're saying is the truth, that young founders seem to be the new hotness, but the truth is they on average fail more often than older founders. And more millionaires globally are minted through entrepreneurship after the age of 40 than before. And that's because of everything you're saying. Once you've failed sufficiently, you've learned what you don't like, what you don't want, and what you never want to do again. And then you avoid that stuff like the plague.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, there's a weird obsession among the investor class. I think it's actually fading now, but for the last 20 years, there's been a weird obsession among the investor class, at least here in the United States, and I think a little bit in Europe, that young founders, right, people between the ages of 20 and 30, are the ones who are most likely to build those huge billion-dollar businesses. And that's the only thing those people are interested in. So whereas an entrepreneur, your interest should be building your first successful business, or building a successful business, something that's profitable and that gives you the life that you want and that impacts the world in the way you want. But that is not what investment asset classes and institutional investors care about.
Absolutely not. So Rand, when you think of the word innovation, how do you define it or explain it out loud? Like, what does that word mean to you?
To me, it is finding a new problem or finding a new way to solve an existing problem.
Perfect. And for the obvious link to curiosity on this podcast, how would you fit innovation and curiosity together?
I don't think that you can discover new problems or discover new ways to solve problems unless you are inherently curious, unless you're looking, right? I think that the interesting part of this is that there's a belief that you can systematize that, right? That you can like build some formal structure for here's how we're going to figure out what problems exist in the market or what problems people are having. But if you don't at your core have that, it's almost a psychological aspect of a person, right? If you don't have that core caring about digging into the problem and asking questions and an open mind, right, about what the answers might be or which answers might not exist, which all feed into curiosity, I don't think you're going to do a great job. And I've seen it plenty of times, right? I've seen plenty of times when I hired smart, talented people who sort of checked all the boxes, but they just didn't at their core care about the problem that much. I think this is one of the dumbest mistakes I made at Moz, was hiring people who had, been through the startup ringer before and helped build successful companies. But did they care about SEO or the problems of SEOs, or did they know, did they have sort of a like deep desire to get to know that world more? Or were they basically joining the company and they're like, great, this is a good fit for my skills. I can apply my skills and help this company succeed. If you don't care about the problem, at a scaling startup, it's not going to work. I think you got to go to later stage companies if you're that type of person.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it earlier on in this conversation, that obsessive personality trait. I think that's kind of key to wanting to be curious. And the example that I use frequently when I talk about this to corporates is Charles Darwin. He was not obsessed with finding how humans were linked to animals. He was obsessed with organisms. Right. He just wanted to go and research the biological history of all of these things that interested him. And then he happened to understand the link and put it all together later on in his life. He didn't go after it because it was cushy. He didn't go after it because he wanted money. He was just curious about something in an obsessive manner.
Absolutely. My obsession was never with, hey, how do I change the world of founding companies and investing in companies? It was only when I got to the Galapagos of building a startup and discovered, right, all these new things that I went, wait a minute, there's a structure that's biasing all of us to make these dumb mistakes and to do things in ways that aren't right. And it's because of all these things. How can I change that? Right. And Lost and Founder and Sparktoro, all that are part of that.
I'm interested in the role that curiosity plays in your personal life.
Yeah. I mentioned I still have that kind of obsessive streak. I don't know if you have this, Nick, but I will say one of the geniuses, in my opinion, around fulfilling the obsessiveness that many human beings have, especially in sort of entertainment and enjoyment, has been Netflix. Right? They kind of realized, hey, you know what? People don't like to watch a show every week. They like to sit down and watch 6 hours of the same show and see the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. And I'm like that with all sorts of things. I'm like that with books, right? If the first chapter, the first few pages grabs me, I want to tune out the world and finish the book. I am like that with TV shows. I am like that with video games, which I don't play as much as I used to, but my brother got me a Nintendo Switch for Christmas a couple years ago, and every now and then I'll grab a game and, oh God, 40 hours later, okay, all right, I'm done with this game. Get back to work. That is true with rabbit holes of all kinds. I am particularly bad about it with cooking. So Geraldine would tell you, Rand is obsessed with, some certain food groups. I'm particularly obsessed with pasta and risotto and a lot of Italian recipes. And so, man, I have probably made risotto, 40 times in the last 3 years. And every time it's practicing, trying to get it better and better and better.
I can't wait to eat your risotto.
Yeah, I'm pretty damn good at it right now. Part of that is, I learned how to make a very collagen-rich stock, which is what helps give risotto a lot of the, not just flavor that you get in the rice, but also that almost sauce that surrounds it at the end of the process. Which comes from the husk of the rice grain itself, but it also comes from the stock that you cook it in. And so for a long time, I didn't realize that I had to boil bones for 8 hours before I use them in making risotto. And has made a huge difference. So yeah, I have that curiosity in my personal life too, and that obsession.
And that conversation right there is why I'm writing this book and doing this podcast, because where on earth would I have heard the founder of Moz and Sparktoro tell me about how to make the perfect risotto?
Yes.
What a time to be alive.
It is. There are so many different things. I had this with, I was obsessed for a number of years with grilled steak, with grilling steak. And one of the scientific problems with grilling steak, but almost any meat, is almost all of the energy, like 99% of the heat energy, goes into removing moisture, surface moisture, right? So you put a nice ribeye on your grill, and most of that heat energy is just removing the surface moisture. Which is why basically by the time the inside gets to the temperature, the very middle of the inside gets to the temperature that you want it, there's like kind of gray on the outside, and it's too seared on the outside. And if you want to solve this problem, you have to find some way of removing surface moisture before you do it. And there's a number of ways of doing that. The reverse sear, which is where you sort of heat up the whole steak to the temperature that you want the thing to be, and then you just sear it at the end. There's also a favorite method, which is the salt. You salt it in a dry environment. So you basically salt your steak 48 hours, 72 hours before you're going to grill it very heavily. The salt takes off most of the surface moisture, right, leaving it dry in the fridge. And then you sear it, and the salt has penetrated all the way through the meat too, which makes it taste amazing. So yeah, I got obsessed with that for a while.
That was riveting. I've learned so much in this last 5 minutes.
Yeah, but you can feel that energy, right, in entrepreneurial practices too, where it's like, oh, why are these customers having this problem in this field, and like, how do I solve it? And if only I could figure it out. And then I got to show them how to do it, and I have to make it an exciting story so that people pay attention to it. And yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned that's exactly the issue you said you had at Moz, is you didn't hire people with that obsessive nature. And it is such a key thing. When I left university, our dean of students called me into his office and said, don't panic about getting a job. You've done philosophy. And in fact, philosophy masters is one of the most sought after corporate degrees to be hired. And I said, that's really strange. Why? He said, well, anyone can teach you how to do accounting, but very few people can teach you how to think. And that's a really good observation.
Yeah, that is a really good observation.
Rand, my final question that I like to bamboozle my guests with is, what is keeping you up at night right now?
We have our first 50 customers at Sparktoro as of today when I'm talking to you.
Amazing.
Yeah, which is amazing and exciting. And I think the two things that are keeping me up right now are one, how are people going to behave with the product in the long term? We've built something that I think is really useful for a lot of marketers and market researchers and entrepreneurs and folks like that. But it's something that a lot of people use only occasionally. And we knew that going in, right? We knew that we were solving an intermittent problem, not a constant pain. It's painful when you have the problem, right? But it's not an ongoing need unless you're an agency and you're solving the problem over and over again for your clients. And so I am obsessing about how we become valuable to someone on an ongoing basis, and also trying to get comfortable with this idea of, I don't need my recurring revenue to be recurring every month. If it's once every 6 months or once every year, but our customers still love us and recommend us, that's okay, right? That's still a great thing. And then I'm also sort of worried. I wouldn't say worried, but I'm very obsessed with thinking about what the long-term future looks like. Like, I think Sparktoro has a lot of potential futures in front of it. But that it's so different from Moz, right? Moz only has, get to $100 million a year in revenue growing at 30% or more year over year, or you've failed. right? So there's only that's the one path, right? But Sparktoro has infinite paths that it could pursue because of how differently it's funded, and that also keeps me up at night. Are we going to hire people? I think that's the biggest one. I don't know. I don't know whether we should hire people. I don't know when. Or are we going to try and keep it, very small until we're totally overwhelmed? How do we know when we're totally overwhelmed? Those are the questions.
And I suppose therein lies the beauty and the spark of what you do. These entrepreneurial endeavors are not supposed to be simple and straightforward, and if they were, they wouldn't be fun.
Yeah, it's definitely it's anything but boring, and it's nice to be able to have all these possibilities open to you, and then you have to just make sure you don't mess it up.
Well said. Rand, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure finding out about your curiosities, and I look forward to seeing Sparktoro grow.
Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate you having me. Always great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Cult podcast, the show where we talk to incredible people about their fascinating curiosity. If you like this episode, please rate the show, like it, share it, and generally be kind to us and tell people about it. My goal is to spark curiosity that changes the world, and you can help by talking about the show to anyone who will listen. Stay curious. Until next time.